Hi, greetings. It's me, Dr. Paul Gerhardt, and today I want to talk to you about transformational leadership. Now, transformational leadership is probably the most famous out of all the leadership theories that I like to talk about. And we all have probably heard and witnessed acts of leaders that moved us to take action, that have inspired us, that have truly made a positive difference in their organizations or in society as a whole. And that is exactly what transformational leadership is all about. What's so cool about transformational leadership is that it's a model that really helps us understand the different dimensions of leadership. And it's called the full range leadership model for a very good reason. So hopefully you enjoyed today's short presentation on transformational leadership. It really is a phenomenal leadership model. It incorporates the theories of writers from years ago and researchers, and it really helps us understand a phenomena about a type of leader that really gets things done. So I hope you enjoy it. So I want to talk about what transformational leadership really is. Essentially, transformational leadership, or TL, is a process that changes and transforms individuals. As we continue to talk about, every organization is made up of people who bring their unique talents, skills, and abilities to the organization, and individually they add value to help keep the organization strong and competitive. But it takes a really good leader to help people get what they need and inspire them to see an even brighter future. And so having a transformational leadership style really involves really understanding what good leadership is and what great leaders do. So let's talk more about that. Transformational leadership really is about influencing followers to accomplish more. Maybe you've had a leader that does that. Something that's really important to understand is transformational leadership really talks about people at the top of an organization. However, don't think that people at all different levels of the organization can't be transformational leaders, because as you look at the qualities of what makes a typical transformational leader a leader, you'll probably know that no matter what level of the organization that you're in, you'll probably see these qualities of people. Thing about this this particular theory is it really helps identify three different types of leaders. And the leaders from this theory, which kind of stems from the late 1970s from Burns, is that there are transactional leaders, there are pseudo-transformational leaders, and then there are transformational leaders. And we've probably seen all types of these leaders, at least I know, in my career, but I've also am able to take a step back and look at history and recognize who is who. For instance, a transactional leader, they focus on exchanges between leaders and followers. You know, if you've been given a bonus, or you've been given a reward, or you've been disciplined for something that you didn't do right, that essentially is what a transactional leader does, and who a transactional leader really is. This is their main focus. These are their behaviors that you see consistently that really helps us as scholars identify what a transactional leader does. And what the literature actually suggests is that transformational leaders use transactional qualities to get things done. So transactional leadership is one type of leadership to understand, especially to understand transformational leadership a little more fully. Then there's pseudo-transformational leadership. And this is a focus where a leader really is kind of self-serving. They really are ultimately they want to get things done for the organization, but ultimately it really just serves that person's best interest. And so maybe you've seen those types of leaders, and Burns defined that type of leader who is a little more focused in accomplishing organizational goals for his or her own purposes. Those are pseudo-transformational leaders. And then there are transformational leaders. And these leaders work with processes that engage other people to create connections and help people really feel motivated to go above and beyond for the sake of the organization. And the thing about transformational leaders is it really helps benefit the leader, of course, but it also helps benefit the individuals involved and makes the organization better. Examples of transactional leadership. If you want, you say things like no new taxes, for instance. You get votes, and so you're doing things to get a result. Teachers do it all the time. You turn in these assignments and you do it well, you get a grade. If in any organization, if you surpass organizational goals, then you get a promotion. We see these things happen all the time, and those are just simply transactions that we make, and there's nothing wrong with it because it really does help serve a better purpose. If you're not doing the homework, you're probably not making the connections in your brain and seeing how things fit together. So homework is not something to make people's lives harder. It's something that helps bring the education alive, helps you understand how to apply the concepts that you're learning for, and that's why there's a grade associated with it. You're working really hard, and you're probably doing it because you want that promotion, but as a result, the organization gets the benefit of the labor of your work. So transactional leadership really does have its place, and there's nothing wrong with it if it's used correctly. When I say used correctly, I mean there are leaders who are coercive and abusive, that they're throwing out disciplinary action all the time, when the fact of the matter is it may get corrective results. But ultimately, when people are abusive with discipline, it probably is leaving a bad taste in people's mouths. It's better to guide people to success and to help people do things different and better before mistakes are made. And when mistakes are made, very often those are opportunities to help make systems better. So why discipline people if they're really trying to do the right thing for the right reasons, but things don't turn out the right way? So it's really all about perspective, as you've probably heard me say over and over again if you've watched other videos. So being a transactional leader could be a good thing, but it also could be a bad thing, and that's what's really important to understand. Pseudo-transformational leaders do transform organizations, but they're the ones who do it in a negative. They get so self-consumed, and then when they're exploiting people and they've got warped moral values, people like Adolf Hitler, who got a lot of people to follow them, or Saddam Hussein. I mean, it's really interesting to see how people will follow pseudo-transformational leaders, but when people are getting hurt and it really is ultimately just about the leader, then that's called transformation, a pseudo-transformational leadership. And you don't want to be one of those leaders. You get results, but it really ultimately doesn't serve humanity or your organization very well if your organization is about harming other people. So not a good thing. Pseudo-transformational leadership is an interesting study, but really is about self-serving people, the people who are unwilling to encourage independent thought in thought followers, and these are the people who really exhibit very little caring for other people, and they use inspiration and appeal to manipulate followers, just for the benefit of that leader ultimately. So there are examples throughout history, and it really is important to understand those things. Transformational leaders come in all shapes and sizes. Muhammad Gandhi, he really helped inspire people by raising people's hopes and made people demand change. Ryan White raised people's awareness about AIDS, and if we think about transformational leadership, it really is about engaging with other people. You're creating connections with other people, and you're motivating people to do something in the most moral way to make a positive difference. And so that's how we like to take a look at transformational leadership. Things that we often see in leaders that create change or transformation in organizations is they are typically charismatic. And that's what I like about this theory, is that Bass and Burns really took a look at some of the most effective leaders, which they would call transformational leaders, and they identified characteristic or traits of people. And being charismatic really is something that we don't see all the time. We recognize it when we do see it. But some people consider the characteristic of charisma as being superhuman. So if you want to be able to inspire people to do things differently, be more charismatic. Some people, as controversial as some leaders are, you have to recognize that political leaders like Bill Clinton really was seen by many as being very charismatic. And the same thing with John F. Kennedy, just to name a couple. When we feel attracted to people by the way that they act and behave, and they want us to take a different approach to things, we see that as being charismatic. They help people feel good about what it is that they're in, and they emphasize intrinsic rewards and they de-emphasize extrinsic rewards. They really want people to have higher expectations, and they gain followers by helping them have self-confidence and self-efficacy, being able to see how they can accomplish things. So it's a really cool study to understand transformational leadership. Bass developed an assessment tool that really helps identify different characteristics of what a leader does. There are transformational leaders, transactional leaders, and what we often call laissez-faire leaders. And in the MLQ tool that measures leadership, it kind of identifies what factors are a part of each of those three different leadership styles, so that you can be able to measure those. So in transformational leadership, factor 1 is idealized influence, which is charisma. Factor 2 is inspirational motivation. Factor 3 is intellectual stimulation. And factor 4 is individualized consideration. In transactional leadership, which is also measured by the MLQ, transactional leadership has two main factors. Contingent reward, these are constructive transactions, and then management by exception, or active and passive corrective transactions. And then there is laissez-faire, which really is a hands-off approach to leadership, which makes it non-transactional. So they're there to support people when they need it, but generally they keep their hands off because they recognize that the people that they've employed, that they oversee, really are pretty capable. So looking at transformational leadership as a model, it really does give us a tool to manage the full range of leadership. I mean, it really takes a look at effectiveness and ineffectiveness and passive and active behaviors, and then it considers the frequency of each of these behaviors. And what's kind of interesting is that just like any other academic model, it's been validated scientifically because people, like followers, will be asked to think about their leader and take the assessment and answer the assessment in a way as they're thinking about it, and then the leader will take the assessment, and you can kind of gauge the similarities of how followers see the individual and how the leader sees his or her own leadership style, and usually they should be matched up, generally speaking. So statistically speaking, that's a model to help people really understand where their strengths are and how much of a transformational leader they are and how much of a transactional leader they are, or a laissez-faire leader for that fact. Idealized influence is about acting as a strong role model. They have high standards and morals, and they have ethical conduct. They make others want to follow the leader's vision. Inspirational motivation is about communicating high expectations. They inspire followers to commitment and engagement in a shared vision, and they use symbols and emotional appeals to focus group members to achieve more than just self-interest. Intellectual stimulation, another factor of ideal transformational leadership. Intellectual stimulation is about stimulating followers to be creative and innovative, challenging their own beliefs and valuing those of the leader and the organization. They're supporting their followers, and they're always trying new approaches, and they develop innovative ways of dealing with organization issues. Individualized consideration, the fourth I, is about listening carefully to the needs of the followers. They're acting as coaches to assist followers in becoming fully actualized, helping followers grow through personal challenges, and they show optimism, which helps employees become engaged in their work. So those are the four I's: idealized influence, inspirational motivation, intellectual stimulation, and individualized consideration. So obviously I'm kind of paraphrasing the literature, but it really is an interesting study to be able to look at the characteristics of transformational leadership. We are always changing in our organizations, and we need to, in order to meet the needs that are always growing of our followers and our stakeholders in the organization. So every organization needs transformational leaders to keep the organization strong and moving towards a brighter future. Transactional leadership qualities, they're essentially those two factors: contingent reward and management by exception. And those are also needed in order to help leaders accomplish organizational goals through their followers' work. So contingent reward simply is the exchange process between leaders and followers where their effort is being exchanged for specific rewards, just like it sounds like. You do this, you get this. Management by exception is leadership that involves corrective criticism, negative feedback, and negative reinforcement. And ultimately this gets really quick results, but in the longer run, what does that do for levels of trust? So leaders really need to be careful when they're practicing management by exception, because people never forget how people make them feel. And that's one of the wisest sayings that I've ever heard by the late, great Maya Angelou. It's not what people say that you remember, but it's how you make people feel that they remember most. And of course I'm paraphrasing Maya Angelou, but that really is very true. If you are a leader, you don't want to leave a bad taste in people's mouths about who you are as an individual. Everybody is doing the best they can most of the time with what they have, and if you can help bring people up, that makes the organization stronger, because you're helping people be truly stronger. And that's the cool thing about leadership, is we all have the ability to influence the way of being of other people. So I always suggest that you do it in a positive way, because that's how you make a positive difference. Beating people up can get people to stop doing certain behaviors, but it really does diminish the amount of that you have with that individual. And people talk. You know, people will talk about how injustices have been done to them, when it certainly is much easier to find an employee who is having a challenge and giving them what they need, whether it be more training or support or resources to help them be the best that they were hired to be. So that's what great leaders do. They remove obstacles and they find ways to support people. And that really is important. So you have to have a little bit of emotional intelligence in order to be an effective leader, or a lot of emotional intelligence to be an effective leader. So we all have choices all the time, but it's the decisions that we make as leaders that makes the biggest difference. So there is laissez-faire leadership, which really is a hands-off approach, let things ride. And there's a time and a place for that in every organization, you know, being able to let other people have responsibility. You know, sometimes delaying decision and sometimes giving no feedback is okay. But generally speaking, you want to praise good behavior when it's done, so you get more good behavior. You want to help people do even better when they. So, granted, don't tell people how to do their job if they're already good at what they do. There's a lot of different ways to get results, and I think that's one of the most important things to consider when you're thinking about what effective leaders do. Bennis and Nannis in the mid-1980s talked about 4 leader strategies in transforming organizations. First, you have to have a clear vision of what the organization's future state will look like. You know, ultimately, organizations constantly need to change. If they're not changing, they won't stay competitive, and they won't maintain loyal followers because they're not constantly giving them what they need. You also need to be able to recognize the internal factors of the organization and put systems in place to help people do what it is that they need to do to keep the organization strong. Third, you have to create trust by making their position known and by standing by it. So as leaders, we get our power from our positions, but we can hold on to our power by really helping people get what they need, because we're using our resources in a way that is influential and allows people to do what they do best, and creatively deploy themselves through positive and positive regards. So we all have to maintain our own self-esteem and our own image, and so being an effective leader really means you have to know your own value. So one of the models in leadership is Kouzes and Posner's leadership model, and they talk about modeling the way. You know, you've got to show it can be done. Having an inspired shared vision, you know, bring people into what you ideally want the organization to look for. When things aren't working, you got to be able to challenge current processes and be willing to change things. But at the same time, you have to enable people to act, and you have to inspire people. You encourage their hearts. You know, you can make people do things, but it's even better when you're inspiring people to be their very best. And that's really what transformational leaders do. So in this transformational leadership model, you know, you're taking a look at other leadership models that have been published and researched, and you recognize that this transformational model actually gives us a set of criteria to be able to evaluate our own personal effectiveness and our behaviors, what we do. So In a nutshell, that's transformational leadership. This transformational leadership model, again, it takes a look at transformational qualities of a leader. I mentioned those 4 I's. It takes a look at transactional leaders, and you're using transactions at the right time to get results. And it also analyzes and helps us understand the difference between a transformational leader and a pseudo-transformational leader. So anyway, I know that I've talked way more than you probably were hoping for, but I'm hoping that more than anything else that you have a much better understanding of who transformational leaders are and what they do. It's a very important model. It's probably the most widely known leadership of all of them, and we've probably seen leaders who get phenomenal results in transforming organizations by changing the way people see things in the future, and helps people want to be a part of making that positive difference that does transform the organization. All right, thanks so much for your time. I truly appreciate it. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and I hope you have a great day, because only you get to choose how you feel about it. I'm Dr. Paul Gerhardt.